Right, we're going to have a look now at osmosis, and we're going to have a look at transpiration, two processes that take place in plants in order to move water around in particular. Plants use water to keep their leaves cool, transport minerals, it enables them to photosynthesize to produce glucose, keep the cells firm, and so keeps the plant rigid. The plants need to balance the amount of water they take in with the amount that they lose, and water can be lost at the leaves by evaporation, transpiration through the stomata. If you remember, the stomata are surrounded by the guard cells, and the guard cells actually control whether the stomata is open or closed. If you remember back to the structure of the leaf, you have the waxy cuticle on the surface of the leaf, which acts as a barrier to stop water from evaporating. Also, the majority of the stomata are on the underside of the leaf, where they are less exposed and less likely for evaporation to take place. So if we look then at the support system in a plant, and I'm sure if you've seen a plant that's sort of wilting, that's like really floppy, this is because there isn't enough water holding the sides of the vacuoles against the cell walls. So the plant cells have inelastic cell walls, and together with the water inside the cells are essential for the support of young woody plants. Cell walls prevent them from bursting due to excess water entering them and contributing to turgidity. So if we think about the difference between animal cells and plant cells, animal cells don't have this cell wall, and so they can burst if they are too full of water, whereas with plant cells, they will just become really turgid, where the vacuoles will push on the side and really make it all really full and make the plant stand up. Obviously the opposite then is if there isn't any water or there's a lack of water, then the leaves will become flaccid or floppy. If there's plenty of water in the soil, the stomata will open to allow transpiration, and transpiration is the movement of the water throughout the plant. Plants take up the water and the minerals from the soil through their roots, and remember, we're looking at their root hair cells. Let's just go back to that. The root hair cells extend between the soil particles, and these greatly increase the surface area of the roots. The water flows up the stem and into the leaf, and the water leaves the plant by evaporation and diffusion from inside the leaves, and this is called transpiration. It's the whole movement of water going in at the roots, up through the stem, and evaporated out of the leaves. Don't forget, some of the water is still used for other processes as well. Okay, so if we have a look then this is a really good diagram to show you what happens in plant cells and animal cells, because when we were talking about water entering into the cells, we're looking at the process of osmosis. Okay, and you'll see what I was just talking about in terms of turgid and flaccid. If you look at the diagrams at the bottom, you'll see where you've got a plant that's got a vacuole that's really full of water, it pushes on the sides of the cell, and this is known as turgid. And if you've got a cell where the vacuole is empty, then you'll see that it's pulling away from the sides. This is known as plasmolysed. In an animal cell, you'll see at the top there, you've probably heard of isotonic drinks and things like that, and that's because they've got water with different ions in them of sugars and salts. So here at the top you can see in the centre you've got your normal cells, so you've got a good concentration of water there that's got the correct salt levels in them, so that the water can flow in and out of the cell at a constant rate. If you've got too much water on the outside of the cell, then that will go into the cell and it will eventually make the cell burst. The opposite is if you haven't got enough water on the outside and the solution is highly concentrated in salts, then the water will try and leave the cell to try and even out the outside, meaning that your cells will shrink, and that's also a problem. So, as I said, we're looking at turgor pressure, okay, and this, like I said, is when the water enters the plant by osmosis, the cells by osmosis, and creates a pressure inside, and this is known as turgid. If there's not enough water, it's flaccid. If the sides pull away, if the vacuole pulls away from the sides, this is called plasmolysis, and the cell becomes plasmolysed. Okay, so water loss from the leaves. Transpiration and water loss are unavoidable consequences of photosynthesis. The plant needs to make sure that it can balance the water loss with the water uptake from the roots. And the stomata vary in number, size and distribution between plants depending on where they live. Plants are adapted to reducing water loss. Like I said, if you are asked to give a description of how this happens, you've got the waxy cuticle on the top, you've got the stomata on the underside of the leaves, you've got the water system goes in through the roots, up through the stem and evaporated out through the stomata. If the plant becomes it loses too much water, then the guard cells can actually close. Okay. So if you look at the structure of a leaf, can you see this little diagram over on the bottom right hand side? This is your vascular bundle, and it is made up of xylem cells and phloem cells. Can you notice that the phloem are on the outer side and the xylem are on the inside? Because sometimes you're asked to label a diagram to say where are the phloem, where are the xylem. Now what you need to remember is the xylem are bringing the water up through the plant. They only move in one direction, and this is transpiration, which we've just talked about. But if you look, the phloem actually allows the movement of the food substances, usually glucose, but other substances as well, around the plant. Because if you've made glucose, then it has to be stored somewhere, and then when the plant needs it, it can take it out of storage and take it to where it's needed, whether it's to develop flowers or develop seeds or anything like that. And that's called translocation, where you're translocating the different substances. Okay, now you may be asked to talk about the structure of those particular cells. The first thing to remember is that xylem cells are hollow tubes made from dead plant cells. The hollow tube in the inside is called the lumen. It's a bit like if you think about a hose pipe, the hole in the middle of the hose pipe is called the lumen. Same thing, the inside of the xylem cell is the lumen. The cellulose cell walls are thickened and strengthened with a waterproof substance. Now the phloem cells are long columns of living cells, and that's one of the main differences. Xylem are dead, phloem are living, able to translocate sugars both up and down the plant. Xylem go up, phloem up and down. Okay, and then the roots anchor the plant in the ground and absorb water and minerals. And the root hair cells, I'm saying it again, you must say hair cells, have an enormous surface area for the absorption of water. So factors that can affect transpiration. Light. If there's more light, then the rate of photosynthesis will increase. If the rate of photosynthesis increases, there's going to be more transpiration because you need water for photosynthesis. Air movement. If there's a lot of wind, then transpiration again increases as the movement of air increases, because remember, if the water is being evaporated out of the leaf and there's more heat, then more is going to be evaporated because the last lot has been moved away. Temperature. The rate of photosynthesis increases as the temperature increases because again more photosynthesis is taking place, so more water is needed, so more transpiration is taking place. Humidity. Humidity is all to do with how much water vapour is in the air, and if there's an increased humidity, this actually decreases the rate of transpiration. because if you think about it, the plant is surrounded by water particles already, so there's not going to be more water evaporated out. So that's one to remember. Humidity decreases transpiration. Stomata location. Hot climate plants like cacti and things like that tend to have the fewer stomata overall and no stomata on the upper surface, because if you're in a hot climate you don't want to evaporate out any useful water that you've got. So lastly, let's just have a look at a little experiment that is used to measure the rate of transpiration, and we use this little thing here called a pedometer. Now if you come across this word in the exam and you haven't looked at this, then it will probably really sort of freak you out, because you'll think, what on earth is a pedometer? But really it's a very basic piece of equipment that you can see here over on the right hand side. So the first thing we do is we take a small plant shoot and we hold it in a test tube with a bung around its top to prevent any water evaporation from inside the tube, because the whole point of this is that we're keeping it as airtight as possible. As the plant transpires, it takes up water from the test tube to replace that which is lost. All the water is then pulled up, and you'll see there's a little air bubble in the tube of the pedometer, and all that happens is that the air bubble moves along. So all we're proving is that transpiration is taking place, because the plant is taking up the water, and this in turn is pulling the air bubble, and all you're doing, like I say, is just proving that because that air bubble is moving, that the water is moving into the plant. Okay, so please remember, osmosis, movement of water from high concentration to low concentration across a partially permeable membrane. Transpiration is the movement of water from the root hair cells up through the xylem cells and into the leaf cells for photosynthesis, or out through evaporation.